Temple Ashaju, our business correspondent, is live to us from our studios at the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Temple, good morning. Getting here into this story, let's start with the Airtel story that you just briefing us about a few minutes ago. What's the latest here? What are you hearing? Let's start from there.
Well, we understand the facts as opposed to what we're used to, a fact behind the listing program. This is really different. This will be a fact before the listing session today. That is what we understand will transpire here in the markets today. And so Airtel is not officially being listed today. What we will see will be the market briefing as to what they intend to use the proceeds for, how much was raised eventually. The news is out there already that what we've seen so far is the fact that they couldn't meet the minimum 300 shareholders requirement for listing here on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and that what I think it was just 87 subscribers that they had eventually. But we will really have to wait to hear directly from Airtel themselves today by 11 o'clock when the market briefing holds, Bosun.
Yes, this is a fact before the listing. One of the stories that came out from some interactions over in the last few days, Temple, is that Airtel has less than 300 minimum shareholders threshold that is regulatory approved for listing in terms of initial shareholders.
Which is the reason why they are getting the waiver to get listed here.
Yes, we'll run through this issue with
because if you go by
MTN,
well, I think because these focused more on institutional investors, the price for this is really high, coming in at 363 to 454 naira by way of offer. And the fact that the premium listing has actually held on the London Stock Exchange, I think at an offer price of some 80 pence to 80 to 100 pence or thereabout. That's of every 50 pence ordinary shares. So that way, things have been more focused on the London Stock Exchange. So for the listing that is to take place here in the Nigerian Stock Exchanges, that is just a secondary listing. And so there are so many activities that surrounded this particular offering of Airtel, because if you look at it, it is totally different from that of MTN. MTN was by way of introduction. This is by way of IPO and via book building. At the end of the day, the figures that have been raised has actually been full of disparity, but as in terms of how the different fund management houses have actually reported it. So it's best we just wait to hear directly from Airtel today. We know that some approval have been given by the Council of the Nigerian Stock Exchange, but by the time this briefing holds today, we'll have a clearer picture of things as to the listing of Airtel on the NSE, Bosun.
Yeah, I think it is good for everyone to understand this, and Temple, that yes, if you do a listing by introduction, you have very few number of shares, what you call beneficial shareholders who are coming to the market. Sure. But again, you do an IPO, which is for high net worth individuals and institutional investors. And these are insurance, investment banks, PFAs, whatever. These are the big boys, and a few Nigerians who have deep pockets who can afford to buy in dozens of millions of naira or hundreds of millions. So this is big, and Airtel wants to raise a lot of money to fill the gap in its balance sheet. That's what this is all about. So you don't have too many shareholders coming through. Yeah. And this needs to be, like you said, they need to properly brief the market, talk to everyone today to get us to understand this before we run into some other pressures and concerns with retail investors and others down the line who feel, hey, what's going on? You told us July the 5th is no longer happening. So what is going on? Temple, listen, put your ears to the ground. We'll get back to you before the end of the show. A short while ago, information coming through from the Nigerian Stock Exchange that the listing of Airtel Nigeria will not take place today, has been reported, widely reported over the last couple of days. What this will take place today is the fact before the listing by the Nigerian Stock Exchange. That came in about an hour ago, trying to reset everyone's mindset that perhaps Yarimbo and the rest of our crew may likely make an appearance on the trading floor today. We understand the listing may take place on Monday. There's no clarity on that yet. There's no definitive announcement being made by the stock exchange. We hope to get that through. So let's quickly get through to Temple Ashaju, our business correspondent, and he's live to us from the NSE on the trading floor. Temple, I'm sure you've been speaking to a few folks, making a few phone calls. How much about this developing story do you know?
Well, we got a press statement from the stock exchange a while ago saying that, confirming the postponement of the listing and that the dates will be communicated much later. The reason for the postponement is simply because they needed to put some pre-listing issues together, get that resolved, because if you recall, we talked about the fact that they couldn't meet the minimum 300 numbers of shareholders that is required to get Airtel listed here in the market. I think it's about 87 that they had eventually, or subscription. We're not too clear about that as well. So all of that had to be put together, and hopefully at the before the meeting, there would have been some kind of an interface between the Airtel team and the Council of the Nigerian Stock Exchange, so they can give us a sense of where they are in terms of getting this secondary listing consummated here on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, because I think that of London Stock Exchange is actually held before now. Recall that Airtel, it has presence across 14 African countries, and so I think this same IPO somehow seemingly cut across a couple of other African countries before that's post the premium listing on the London Stock Exchange. So perhaps some issues need to be cleared before this listing on the Nigerian Stock Exchange will hold. However, the fact before the listing, which is supposed to give the trading, the broker-dealer community some kind of understanding of where they are, what they intend to use these funds for, will still hold as scheduled in the next few minutes. It's meant to be 11 a.m. This morning here in the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Bosun.
Yes, Temple, perhaps the stock exchange, the Nigerian Stock Exchange is trying to avoid a bit of what happened in the case of MTN. I'm going to bring that back here because, again, you remember what happened the day after the listing, or the few days after MTN listing, a bit of concerns from traders and from investors about where the shares, this and that, what's the volume, where is the float, and all of that. Perhaps the stock exchange is now team thinking, okay, fine, perhaps it's good for Airtel Nigeria to brief the market, brief the stock traders, and they will speak to their clients before the listing is properly done, perhaps as the early days of next week, so that everyone is on board. The news will already be out before listing is done, and folks begin to raise concerns over some of what they may likely see when the listing is done.
Yes, Bosin. That will now relate more to the free float side of things when it comes to the IPO of Airtel, as opposed to listing by introduction, that's MTND. From the briefing we had yesterday with the stock exchanges team, one thing what we gathered was that there's a combination of 25% free float, given the cross-border secondary listing and the premium listing on London Stock Exchange. So this particular deal has a total of 25% free float. How much of that will be open to the Nigerian market or made available to the Nigerian market is yet to be known. And this is one of the key issues that this market briefing of Airtel Africa PLC will be able to resolve eventually. We know that, again, the listing on London Stock Exchange was around 80 pence to 100 pence for the shares. Some have also reported in different quarters that after a post-listing, there was some kind of decline in the share price of Airtel Africa on London Stock Exchange. Perhaps that is something that will create some kind of a fear in the mind of investors, in the secondary market here. So maybe all of these will be part of what what investors will really be looking forward to hear from Airtel, from the Airtel team, so they can give clarity on this investment, which of course has been seeing a whole lot of subscription from the institutional investors and of course high net worth investors here in the Nigerian market, Bosun.
Yeah, thank you. Temple, we got about 8 minutes before the top of the hour when that meeting will take place. We'll be joining you there. So you need to go upstairs and take a front seat, listening to the briefing by Airtel Nigeria and, of course, midwifed by the Nigerian Stock Exchange officials. Thank you so much, Temple Ashaju, our business correspondent from the Stock Exchange trading floor.